celebrate the development, while others are accusing the U.S.
In the tense waters of the Caribbean Sea, a moment of sheer audacity shook the world. Imagine this. An elite U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, a symbol of power and dominance on the high seas, suddenly comes under attack from an unexpected enemy. But this wasn't just any conventional strike. This was a calculated, precision-guided missile strike launched by a country no one expected to challenge the United States in this way: Venezuela. The missile in question? The Fattah, a medium-range ballistic missile with a reputation for precision and devastating impact. On a seemingly routine day, the USS Abraham Lincoln, operating just off the coast of Venezuela, was targeted by this sophisticated weapon. As the missile tore through the sky, the crew aboard the aircraft carrier scrambled to defend their vessel from what seemed like an unthinkable assault. A modern naval warship, equipped with the latest defense systems, found itself in a high-stakes battle for survival against an enemy they never anticipated. How did it come to this? How did a missile from Venezuela find its mark? And what followed next was nothing short of a military confrontation on a scale the world hasn't seen in decades. What makes this attack even more remarkable is the sheer precision of the strike. Venezuela, a country often dismissed as incapable of mounting such a sophisticated assault, had suddenly brought a superpower to the brink of a major international crisis. The Fattah missile, launched with pinpoint accuracy, tore into the USS Abraham Lincoln's defenses, causing chaos and panic within the ranks of the U.S. Navy. The ship's radar systems were overloaded, and its countermeasures struggled to keep up with the speed and trajectory of the missile. For a brief moment, it seemed like the tables had turned. But this attack was just the beginning. The response from the United States was swift, and the situation escalated into something much larger, a full-scale military confrontation that had the world on edge. The U.S. military, enraged and shocked, deployed its fighter jets and missiles in retaliation, but Venezuela was ready. With the element of surprise on their side, the Venezuelan forces had prepared for this moment, anticipating every move. As both sides engaged in an intense battle for control of the seas, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Would Venezuela be able to hold its ground against the military might of the United States? Or would the power of the U.S. Navy prove overwhelming? What happens when a nation like Venezuela, with limited resources, takes on the most powerful military force in the world? And why was this attack so important in the context of global politics? Stick around as we break down the shocking details of this unprecedented naval confrontation, from the initial missile strike to the dramatic aftermath. In this video, we'll uncover the truth behind the attack, explore the military tactics used by both sides, and examine the long-term consequences this battle could have on international relations. This is a story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about military power and geopolitical strategy. Don't miss it. In the months leading up to the unprecedented attack on the USS Abraham Lincoln, tensions between the United States and Venezuela had been simmering beneath the surface, fueled by decades of strained relations. On the one hand, the U.S. had long been a vocal critic of Venezuela's leadership, particularly under the rule of President Nicolas Maduro. The country had been grappling with political unrest, a crumbling economy, and accusations of corruption. On the other hand, Venezuela, under pressure from international sanctions and the isolation brought on by its leadership's actions, had begun quietly strengthening its military capabilities, seeking to challenge the global order in ways that no one anticipated. While most analysts were focused on the economic crisis and Venezuela's domestic struggles, a much quieter and more strategic buildup was happening behind closed doors. Venezuelan officials had been working tirelessly to modernize their defense systems, and their success in acquiring high-tech weaponry had largely gone under the radar. One of the most significant developments came with the acquisition and refinement of the Fattah missile, a medium-range ballistic missile developed with the help of foreign partners, including covert assistance from states with a shared interest in disrupting U.S. global dominance. These missiles, known for their precision and ability to evade modern radar systems, became the centerpiece of Venezuela's new military strategy. As they prepared to show the world they were capable of challenging the might of the U.S. military, officials knew that a demonstration of this power would send shockwaves through global security. In the lead-up to the attack, the USS Abraham Lincoln had been operating off the coast of Venezuela as part of a routine naval deployment. The ship, one of the most formidable assets in the U.S. Navy, was conducting operations designed to maintain U.S. influence in the region. What the crew didn't know was that Venezuela had been tracking their movements for months, gathering intelligence on their capabilities and vulnerabilities. As part of their preparations, Venezuela's military had established a sophisticated network of surveillance satellites, ground stations, and cyber intelligence units aimed at creating a detailed picture of U.S. military assets in the region. The key to Venezuela's success in this attack was the strategic decision to strike when the USS Abraham Lincoln was at its most vulnerable. The aircraft carrier, typically a highly secure and heavily defended asset, was caught off guard as it navigated into a narrow strait where Venezuela's missile defenses were set up for an optimal strike. The Venezuelan military, using a series of decoys and electronic countermeasures, had already overwhelmed the USS Abraham Lincoln's radar systems, making it impossible for the ship's crew to detect the incoming missile in time. The Fattah missile, with its advanced targeting system, was able to lock onto the carrier's precise coordinates, bypassing the ship's defensive measures. In those critical moments, the missile's trajectory was virtually unstoppable. Venezuela's decision to launch the missile at this specific moment was no accident. According to later reports, military analysts in Venezuela had carefully studied U.S. naval tactics, identifying a pattern in their movements that would place the USS Abraham Lincoln at a specific vulnerability point. It was in this narrow window of time that the attack was executed with chilling accuracy. On the day of the strike, a highly coordinated operation was launched from Venezuela's western coast, involving a series of rocket platforms hidden in the dense jungles along the shoreline. These platforms were capable of launching multiple Fattah missiles simultaneously, but only one was needed to make a statement. The missile, fired in the early hours of the morning, soared through the sky toward its target. The U.S. Navy, known for its technological superiority, was caught off guard by the sheer precision of the attack. The missile hit the USS Abraham Lincoln's port side, breaching its outer hull and sending shockwaves through the ship's crew. Although the aircraft carrier's defense systems managed to intercept some of the incoming projectiles, they were unable to stop the Fattah missile, which struck with devastating force. The explosion rocked the ship, sending plumes of smoke into the sky and triggering alarms across the vessel. The impact was significant, and though the damage was contained, the attack marked a clear turning point in the power dynamics of the region. Venezuela's military was quick to claim responsibility, broadcasting the strike as a direct response to what they called U.S. imperialism and interference in Venezuela's sovereignty. For the U.S. military, the attack was both a shock and an embarrassment. How could a country with limited resources have inflicted such damage on one of the U.S. Navy's flagship vessels? The response from Washington was swift and furious. President Joe Biden immediately called for an emergency meeting with his defense and intelligence teams, while the Pentagon activated emergency protocols to protect other assets in the region. The attack on the USS Abraham Lincoln set off a chain reaction of events, leading to an escalation of hostilities between the two nations and drawing the attention of the international community. What had started as a political standoff over sanctions and regional influence had, in a matter of hours, escalated into a full-blown military confrontation. The attack on the USS Abraham Lincoln took place under the cover of darkness, the night sky concealing the impending chaos. It was early in the morning when the first signs of danger appeared on the radar. The crew of the aircraft carrier had been following their routine operations off the coast of Venezuela, unaware that they were being meticulously watched by Venezuelan military intelligence. As the USS Abraham Lincoln sailed through a narrow passage near the coast, a calculated trap had been set in motion. Venezuela, with its newly acquired Fattah missiles, had meticulously tracked the ship's movements for weeks, identifying the precise moment when it would be most vulnerable. Their target was locked, and the missiles were ready to launch. Venezuelan forces had been waiting for the right moment to strike, and this was it. Using a sophisticated network of ground-based missile platforms strategically placed along the Venezuelan coast, the launch sequence was initiated. The Fattah missile, an advanced medium-range ballistic missile, was designed to be highly accurate and capable of evading modern defense systems. Venezuela had quietly invested in improving its missile capabilities with the help of its covert allies, and now the Fattah would be their message to the world. The missile, equipped with an advanced guidance system, was able to track its target with pinpoint accuracy. The crew of the USS Abraham Lincoln was unaware of the imminent threat, as the radar systems on the ship failed to detect the incoming missile due to the advanced countermeasures deployed by the Venezuelans. The missile was launched from a hidden platform along the Venezuelan coast, and within moments, it rocketed through the air at incredible speed, heading directly toward the USS Abraham Lincoln. Despite its state-of-the-art radar and missile defense systems, the ship's crew had only seconds to react. The missile approached with terrifying precision, evading the ship's point defense systems, which were designed to intercept incoming threats. The speed at which the Fattah missile traveled left little room for error. The USS Abraham Lincoln's crew scrambled into action, activating their countermeasures in an attempt to divert the missile. But the strike came too quickly. The missile impacted the USS Abraham Lincoln's port side with an ear-splitting explosion, sending shockwaves through the ship. The force of the blast rattled the entire vessel, and the ship's hull was breached in several places. Emergency alarms blared as smoke filled the interior of the aircraft carrier. Fire teams rushed to contain the blaze, while medical personnel began tending to the wounded. The crew's immediate response was chaotic but determined. They worked together to stabilize the ship and prevent further damage. Despite the extensive damage to the carrier, the ship remained afloat, but the severity of the attack had left the crew shaken and struggling to regain control. The Venezuelan missile strike sent a clear message. Venezuela had successfully launched an attack on one of the most powerful military assets in the U.S. Navy. The attack on the USS Abraham Lincoln was not only a symbolic victory, but a demonstration of Venezuela's growing military capabilities. The precision and effectiveness of the Fattah missile, combined with the element of surprise, proved that Venezuela was capable of executing complex operations that few had previously thought possible. The world watched in shock as the news of the attack spread like wildfire. The U.S. Navy's response was immediate. Fighter jets were scrambled, and emergency operations were set in motion to assess the damage to the USS Abraham Lincoln and prevent further attacks. The Pentagon issued a statement condemning the strike, and President Biden called an emergency meeting with his national security team. The strike on the aircraft carrier was seen as a direct challenge to U.S. military supremacy, and the American public was left to wonder how such a powerful nation could be caught so off guard by a smaller, less technologically advanced country. While the U.S. focused on assessing the damage and formulating a response, Venezuela wasted no time in broadcasting the attack to the world. Venezuelan state media proudly displayed footage of the missile launch, claiming it as a victory for the country's sovereignty and a blow to U.S. imperialism. In their eyes, the strike was a symbol of resistance against foreign interference, and they viewed it as a demonstration of Venezuela's newfound strength. As tensions escalated, the world was left wondering if this was the beginning of a new era in global military conflicts, where nations with limited resources could challenge the might of superpowers. The immediate aftermath of the attack on the USS Abraham Lincoln was a blur of activity, with the U.S. military scrambling to recover from the shock and determine the next steps. The strike had caused significant damage to the aircraft carrier, but it had also raised serious questions about the effectiveness of U.S. defense systems and the vulnerabilities of even the most advanced military assets. For Venezuela, the attack was a calculated risk that paid off, and they now stood at the center of a geopolitical storm. As both nations prepared for the inevitable escalation, the world waited to see how the situation would unfold, knowing that the balance of power in the region had been permanently shifted. The immediate aftermath of the missile strike on the USS Abraham Lincoln was a whirlwind of chaos, confusion, and heightened tensions. The U.S. military, caught off guard by the precision of the attack, quickly moved into full crisis mode. As the aircraft carrier drifted slightly off course, smoke billowing from its wounded hull, its crew fought desperately to keep the vessel afloat. The once mighty symbol of U.S. naval power was now facing an existential threat, its defenses compromised by an enemy that no one had expected to pose a serious challenge. The USS Abraham Lincoln, with its state-of-the-art systems and military superiority, had been struck by a missile from Venezuela, a nation widely considered to be militarily inferior to the U.S. This realization alone was enough to send shockwaves through the Pentagon and the White House. Within minutes of the missile strike, U.S. fighter jets were scrambled, racing to the scene. The U.S. Navy, which prided itself on its swift and overwhelming response to any threat, now found itself in a rare position of vulnerability. The immediate objective was clear: assess the damage to the aircraft carrier and prevent further attacks. The situation was dire. Several sections of the USS Abraham Lincoln had been damaged, including parts of its flight deck, rendering it temporarily unable to launch its jets. Several of its crew members had been wounded, and the fire teams on board were working tirelessly to contain the flames and prevent the situation from escalating further. The decision was made to halt all operations in the region while the military addressed the immediate threat, leaving the aircraft carrier vulnerable to any follow-up attacks. Back in Washington, President Joe Biden and his national security team were briefed on the attack, and an emergency meeting was called. The White House was rattled. A small country like Venezuela, with a significantly smaller military budget and fewer resources, had just launched a direct assault on one of the most powerful military assets in the world. Intelligence officials quickly began working on tracing the missile's trajectory, its origin, and the precise capabilities of the weapon used. What was most troubling was not just the missile strike itself, but the fact that it had been so well coordinated. The U.S. had never expected an attack of this magnitude from Venezuela, which had long been considered a regional power with limited reach. In the hours following the attack, Venezuela's state-run media proudly broadcasted images of the missile launch. The footage showed the Fattah missile launching from the Venezuelan coast, followed by a dramatic slow-motion sequence of the missile's impact on the USS Abraham Lincoln. Venezuela's government, led by President Nicolas Maduro, was quick to frame the attack as a victory, a symbolic blow to U.S. imperialism. Venezuelan officials argued that this was a necessary action to defend their sovereignty and protect the nation from U.S. interference. In a statement released by the Ministry of Defense, they declared that the missile strike was a message to Washington. Venezuela would no longer tolerate U.S. naval dominance in the region. The world, still reeling from the shock of the attack, watched as the U.S. military and the Venezuelan government locked into an increasingly tense standoff. U.S. allies around the world, especially in NATO, began to offer their support. However, many wondered if the attack would lead to a broader confrontation. In the wake of the missile strike, U.S. allies such as the United Kingdom, Canada, and Brazil immediately called for diplomatic solutions. While expressing solidarity with the U.S., they urged Washington to consider a measured response. But the U.S. military, now faced with a wounded aircraft carrier and an adversary who had just made a bold move, was unwilling to back down. A full-scale military response seemed imminent. Within 24 hours, the Pentagon had activated a series of emergency protocols. More fighter jets were deployed to the region, including F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightnings IIs, among the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. The U.S. Navy, though initially stunned by the strike, quickly shifted to a position of readiness, preparing for any further hostilities. In a statement, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to defending its military assets and ensuring that Venezuela would be held accountable for its actions. At the same time, a naval blockade was initiated, surrounding Venezuela's coast to prevent any additional attacks from the country's remaining missile platforms. U.S. intelligence agencies were also tasked with gathering more information about Venezuela's military capabilities, focusing on the origins of the Fattah missile and whether Venezuela had access to additional advanced weaponry. The first few days after the attack were filled with mounting tension. The U.S. military had been humiliated in front of the world, and President Biden faced immense pressure to act decisively. On the other side, Venezuela, emboldened by the success of its missile strike, began preparing for potential retaliation. While the Venezuelan military was much smaller in scale compared to the U.S. military, they had managed to land a significant blow. Intelligence reports indicated that Venezuela had been stockpiling military supplies, including more Fattah missiles, and had been working with certain allies to develop unconventional warfare strategies to further challenge the U.S. At this point, both sides were on high alert, preparing for the next move in what was quickly becoming a volatile standoff. Despite the overwhelming military superiority of the U.S., Venezuela had demonstrated its ability to launch a surprise attack with devastating effect, and that sent a powerful message. In the right circumstances, even smaller nations could strike fear into the hearts of global superpowers. The question now was how far the conflict would escalate. As tensions between the two nations continued to rise, the United Nations called for an emergency meeting to address the growing crisis. The situation had the potential to spiral out of control, and international leaders recognized that it was crucial to prevent further military engagement. However, both Venezuela and the U.S. seemed to be moving towards inevitable confrontation. Venezuela's government, bolstered by the apparent success of the missile strike, was unwilling to back down, and the U.S. military, deeply wounded by the attack, was determined to make a powerful retaliation. On the high seas, the stage was set for a potential showdown between the two nations. U.S. Navy destroyers and submarines began moving into the region, and a series of military drills were conducted in the Gulf of Mexico as a show of strength. At the same time, Venezuela continued to prepare its military assets, with reports indicating that they were readying their air defense systems and additional missile platforms for potential conflict. In a final dramatic move, the U.S. military launched a retaliatory strike aimed at crippling Venezuela's remaining missile launch sites. The strikes were precise, hitting several of Venezuela's coastal defense systems. However, the response was measured. Washington wanted to send a message without pushing the region into full-scale war. Despite the targeted strikes, the situation remained tense, with both nations continuing to bolster their defenses and issue increasingly heated rhetoric. The international community held its breath as the conflict unfolded, fully aware that the attack on the USS Abraham Lincoln marked a dangerous turning point in global power dynamics. Would the world's two largest military powers go to war, or would diplomatic channels manage to prevent further escalation? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. Venezuela had shown the world that it was capable of much more than anyone had anticipated. The balance of power in the region had been irrevocably altered. The aftermath of the missile strike on the USS Abraham Lincoln brought about profound shifts in both regional and global politics. The world watched as two military giants faced off in a conflict that many thought was unthinkable. The attack, initially perceived as a bold but ultimately futile strike by a small nation, had escalated into a full-blown crisis.